we've had a number of great guests in 2023, and it was our thought to bring you a little snippet of some of the guests that we've had on over the past year. We've had guests discussing the metaverse. We've had politicians. We've had experts in areas of gold and mergers and acquisitions in the private sector. We've had finance minister coming on our show discussing the state of the economy and the Bank of Canada and how they work. A number of fantastic guests. And what we wanted to do today is just play a few clips from a few of those guests to really just give you the some exposure to the different types of guests that we've had and the quality of guests that we had. And again, if you have not seen the full interviews with these guests, you can go onto our YouTube channel. They're all there. You can go onto my website as well. A lot of will be there as well. We have a number of podcasts, Spotify, Apple. You can check out our interviews there as well. And so just wanted to give you everyone just a glimpse as to what we've done in this past year and how happy I am. And again, to say thanks to all our guests. The start of the year, metaverse was the word that we all were quite impressed with. And today it's maybe changed over to artificial intelligence. But back then, we were hearing about Facebook changing their name to metaverse. We were hearing about this so-called metaverse. How can you make money in the metaverse? Why is the metaverse important? And is it really the future? And who better to talk to us about the metaverse? CEO of Metaverse Group, Lauren Sugarman. And he spoke to us about how one could profit in the metaverse. How can someone invest in the metaverse? Obviously, you can invest in companies that, such as Meta itself, formerly Facebook, and buy the stock there. But you could also invest, as I'm being told, in, for example, property, real estate in the metaverse. How does that work? And obviously, when we buy property here in actual land in our world here, obviously land is a very a commodity that is not everywhere. Obviously, most of the land here has been built on. But in the metaverse, I would think there's lots of places you could buy real estate. And I've heard outrageous amounts of money being spent on land or real estate in the metaverse. How does that work?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and you're right. There's public equities that one can be part of. Like I said, Roblox. You said Meta, but there's also, as you pointed out, virtual land or virtual real estate, as we refer to it. So today we own over 500 NFTs in places like Decentraland, Sandbox, Urbit, Superworld, etc. That are these digital real estate pieces. And our thesis is quite simple, is that just like traditional real estate, we're there to create a yield. And so we charge people rent to use our land, and we'll create experiences for them.
Metaverse, it was the talk from everyone at that time, earlier 2023. Now I think the talk has shifted a lot to artificial intelligence. So perhaps we'll bring back Lauren and talk to him about the metaverse again and how things have changed. Another great guest that we've had on our show many times, actually, well, a few times anyways, is Dan Kelly, head of CFIB, Canadian Federation of Independent Business. And we've touched, we've spoken to Dan, I guess, a couple of times, asking him how small business is faring during these difficult times of higher expenses, higher costs, higher wages, inflation, higher interest rates. And Dan's been on the show a few times talking to us about what the government can do for small business. And here is Dan Kelly talking to us most recently. What would be your number one thing that you'd like to tell the government that they should be doing?
Well, number one, my usual advice for government, the number one thing they could do is not make it worse. And sadly, as we were talking about a minute ago, the government seemed to be making it worse, adding minimum wage hikes and CPP AI hikes, carbon tax increases. So they're making the job for small businesses more challenging, not less challenging. Secondly, some strategic changes, lowering a couple of tax rates would be a big help, but even giving more time to repay some of the CEBA loans that were issued, that would be also a big help. Third, and this is something that the federal government has already committed to, is lowering a few of the costs that businesses pay. And one of them is credit card processing fees. A lot of merchants in retail, hospitality, the service sector are powered by credit cards. Their customers want to use them. And And those fees, the budget promised to lower those credit card fees by up to 27%.
Dan Kelly, a great interview. And as I said, we've had him on the show a couple of times and always giving us the pulse of small business, how things are going. And as we know, small business makes up much of business in Ontario, in this country. And as goes small business, goes really the entire country. You know, we have a lot of large businesses here, but really, small businesses make up the majority of business in our province. About midway through the year, in the middle of July, I had the pleasure of having the Premier of Ontario on our show. Premier Doug Ford was on our show, and it was a great experience. The Premier was very gracious in coming on our show, dealing with his people and him, and specifically a fantastic interview. And he really was able to shed some light as to how our economy in Ontario is faring. And this is what he said about the state of the Ontario economy.
With talk about a possible recession the end of this year or possibly a recession in 2024, how do you think, or what do you think the state of business is in the province of Ontario?
You know, what I see, the business is just booming right now here in Ontario. I'll give you one example, and I mentioned all the other premiers. First of all, Ontario is leading North American job creation, economic development. People are investing in Ontario from all over the world, and I'll give you some examples in a minute. But, you know, out of the 60,000 jobs that were produced last month in Canada, 55,800, or let's say 56,000 jobs out of the 60,000 jobs, 93% were created right here in Ontario. That's pretty staggering. And the number of jobs since we've taken office in 2018 is now topped over 700,000. So there's 700,000 more people working today than were working 5 years ago.
When we spoke to the Premier, I know that in talking to some colleagues of mine, everybody wanted to know not only what the state of the economy in Ontario is and how we're doing, but everybody was always asking the question, what can the government do to help individuals in Ontario? Obviously, this year has been very difficult. Higher interest rate costs, inflation, higher expenses for small businesses. What can the government do to help individuals and businesses in the province?
What can your government do? What can you do to help these small businesses, to help business in general, or to help the average family in Ontario cope with these higher interest rates and higher inflation rates?
Well, thanks for that. First of all, I understand what the Bank of Canada is doing. I totally disagree with them. They're trying to slow down inflation, and we won't be able to tell the impact for, maybe 6 months down the road. Inflation has dropped to about 3.5%. I believe it's going to go down. But what they don't understand is what's happening to the families when they have to go renew their mortgage. The only people that are making tons of money are the banks. When you renew your mortgage, it's hurting families. And really, the monetary policy is a conversation for the federal government to have with the Bank of Canada. It's not our jurisdiction. But in saying that, I'll tell you what we are doing. I mentioned the $8 billion we're reducing off the backs of small, medium-sized companies every single year. We're the only jurisdiction in the entire country that have cut the gas tax 10 cents per liter. That's hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And I just wish the federal government could give people a break on the worst tax anyone could face, and that's the carbon tax.
So again, another great interview from the Premier, giving us some insights as to what his government is doing in Ontario. And if you didn't get a chance to see that interview and some of these interviews that I'm showcasing today, please go to YouTube, our YouTube channel, website. These interviews are there in full. From the Premier, we actually had the pleasure of speaking to his finance minister, the Honorable Peter Bethlenfalvy. The Ontario finance minister was on our show not too long ago, actually. And I really wanted to talk to the finance minister and ask him about, Bank of Canada. Does the finance minister speak to the Bank of Canada? And he told us that he does on a regular basis. I just wanted to get his ideas as to what the Bank of Canada has been doing. Does he agree with all these interest rate hikes? And what are his thoughts on how the Bank of Canada is functioning right now? And in, raising rates 10, 11 times in the last couple of years. Does that make sense? And what effect is it having on Ontarians?
My take on the Bank of Canada is they have a lot of inputs. They get data and evidence, but they do talk to a lot of people to get a sense of what's going on. And I think as a politician, yeah, they're independent, but I think also I'm sure people always want to hear what the condition on the ground is, and that's where Doug Ford and our government are very good, talking to people all the time where they're hurting, what's really impacting, and clearly these higher interest rates. The fastest rise, I think, in Bank of Canada history, 10 increases to 5% now. I think prime is over 7%. It's having its effect. We're feeling it on the ground. People who are refinancing their mortgages, people who are paying increased costs for food and for rent and other inputs. So people are feeling it at a time when there is all this uncertainty. So you'd have to ask the Bank of Canada. I did write the Minister of Finance about the Canada Pension Plan, and because I thought that that's very important that we talk about to provide stability where Alberta Pension Plan wants to leave the Canada Pension Plan. And, people work in Alberta and then they retire in many parts of the country and vice versa. So I think it's important that at this time we think about the hardships that people have, the uncertainties they have, and do everything we can to help them.
Patty Levitt-Reid, a friend of mine, Patty and I have worked together for many years now. Some of you may recall, Patty was the chief financial commentator for CTV, and she was on BNN for quite some time. Prior to that, was vice president over at TD Waterhouse, TD Bank. And I've had the pleasure of having Patricia Levitt-Reid on our show, I guess I said a few times now. And I think when you go back over the last year, there's been a lot of confusion as to what the Bank of Canada was going to do, still is going to do going forward. Will they ever raise rates again? Will they begin to lower rates next year? And so I posed the question back a few months ago to Patty, saying if she was the Federal Reserve or the Bank of Canada, would she raise interest rates? And interesting enough, she actually flipped the question back on me. But let's see what she had to say. Based on the inflation rate that we just received yesterday, do you think the Bank of Canada has another interest rate increase up their sleeve before the end of the year? And if you were the Bank of Canada, or the Federal Reserve for that matter, would you raise rates again before the end of the year?
Yes, I would. Different central banks. I think the U.S. Federal Reserve has done a really good job. They telegraph. They pretty much always follow suit. Not a lot of surprises, unlike the Bank of Canada, who have been known in the past to surprise us. But when you see an inflation rate of 4%, when you look at mortgage servicing costs up 30%, rent 6%, goods as well as services higher, even if you strip out the volatile components, which would be, of course, energy and food, we're still in August, it's 4.6%. And so if you believe in that 2% target, and if you want the Bank of Canada to have the credibility that it is striving for, the odds went higher on October 25th on the next rate announcement. We could see another 25 basis points.
As I said, I know Patty mentioned or said that she would raise interest rates one more time, and flipped the question around and asked me what I would do. And I actually said I would not raise rates. And I guess now looking back, the Bank of Canada did not raise rates anymore after our meeting. And so quite interesting to our conversation. I know that Patty and I go back and forth a number of times on economic topics. And in this case, I guess I was right this time. Not often I'm right. Usually Patty's right. So it was good to be right, and good to be right for all of us, right? Because we don't want interest rates rising anymore. I'm pretty sure of that. And so this was just a glimpse into the quality of guests that we've had on our show in 2023. As I said, we couldn't put everybody in this little package here to show all of you, but just wanted to show those that are watching today that this is the quality of guests that we strive to have. This is the quality of guests that we look to have in 2024. So as we turn the clock and turn the calendar, I should say, to 2024, I look forward to bringing you more guests with different points of view on different topics and making our show as interesting as we can make it, hopefully answering many of the questions that viewers have. And as always, if you have any questions regarding any of the information our guests are discussing or presenting, feel free to send me an email, give me a call. I can always go back to our guests and get some clarification. So once again, I want to thank all our guests for coming on our show in 2023. And I look forward to a fantastic lineup of guests in 2024.